So don't think that I forgot about our resident K-pop stan, Watanabe no Suna, over here on the JP version of the game, is getting a raid up alongside Ibuki Doji and Kintoki over here for the 5.5 campaign, which, by the way, if you want to compete in the next Guda Guda event, make sure that you get up to Lost Belt 5.5 done if you're playing on the JP version of the game. And after you finish 5.5 and for whatever reason you don't want to summon on the new Guda Guda event and you want to summon for Fiery K-pop Man, well, that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. We're going to talk about how good he is and whether he's worth summoning for or not, although, spoiler alert, I think he's quite good. I don't think he's necessarily broken or anything, but I do think he's quite good. But before we begin, if you have not already, your boy is on that daily FGO content grind, and all he asks for in return is a like on the video and a subscribe to the channel, as we are trying to make it to 100k. We are closing it on 12k, which means, you know, we're just slowly getting there. Like, it ain't gonna be a quick journey, but we are making progress. So help your boy out with that. If you want extra content, I do stream every single day, at least every weekday, over on the Twitch, link down in the description down below. You can go over to like the schedule area on the Twitch channel to kind of see when I stream in your local time to see if you can make it. Would love to see more of you guys come out there. And then finally, if you want extra content, you can click that join button to become a channel member, where I'm going to be uploading like challenge quest videos, maybe some bonus videos for members only, once we start getting some more members. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and click that join button. But with that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into our boy Watanabe no Suna, who, correct me if I'm wrong, has like some relation to some of the other poets and writers in Fate lore. I'm not as caught up on his lore, but I believe he has something to do with like Sei Shonagen or Kin Liangyu. I recall him having like some relation to them, so the lore junkies in the comments down below can definitely pop off and maybe you can learn something from them, but I just recall that being some interesting lore. But let's not talk about lore and instead talk about his hits, which, as a more modern servant, he's got some pretty decent hits, some decent natural NP and star generating stats, although they're a little bit better than average, I would say, but they're nothing to write home about. Although Suna definitely has things in his skill set that definitely make him just absolutely pop off with all of these, so really it's just the hits are good enough as is, and his skills make them even better on top of that. So the main things that we want to go ahead and note are the two arts cards that have 3 hits each, and he has 2 of them with 0.60% NP generation rate, which is pretty decent in and of itself. And like I'm always going to say, you really want to focus on getting crits on said arts cards if you really want to massively refund your NP. But again, like I'm saying, Suna does have something in his skill set to massively buff up that NP gen, but we'll talk about that in just a little bit. His star gen is at 10.2% with 1 4-hit quick card, which isn't the worst thing on the planet, but I have no idea what you think you're doing if you try to click that card. Finally, he has the extra attack with the 5 hits that we all know and love, and if you didn't know, the extra attack is a composite card that gens stars, NP, and does big boy damage. And it makes your DPS servants just look that much better when they have a very strong extra attack, although the unfortunate thing is that it cannot crit, and Suna's natural NP and star gen stats aren't quite high enough to make the extra attack look super good, so you might have to buff up his Appen skill if you really want to like make that extra attack pop off, which I don't know who's going to be doing that for Suna, but maybe you just really like him. I have no idea, but let's get into the meat and potatoes of this servant. Let's start talking about his skills, which skill 1 is essentially his Buster crit skill, because it's going to be giving his Buster card some pretty decent star weight for 3 turns, and then it's going to buff up his crit damage by 50% for 3 times for 3 turns. Now, I don't know why they kind of shafted him in this way, because usually when you get 50% crit damage for 3 turns, it's not hit based, and if they were to make it hit based like this for 3 turns on like the 3 hits, usually they make it higher than 50%, like they usually go up to all the way to 100%. So I just find that a little weird that they did not give that to him. But in all reality, that's more useful just getting it for the raw 3 turns. That's better if you're like soloing, because you probably won't use all 3 hits over the course of 3 turns just because of how the card shuffling works in FGO. Realistically, you might get like 2 crits on turn 1 and then another one on turn 3. So it usually will work out. It's just a little bit odd and might be a little bit of a shaft if you get into a situation where Suna is the last man standing, or you're trying to solo a quest with him. He won't be able to take that much advantage of it. But this is definitely tailored towards getting some big busty crits on his Buster cards. And that's kind of the name of the game with Suna. You kind of pop this when you want to do big Buster crits, and then looking at skill 2, you pop this when you want to refund a massive amount of his NP back. Because what this does is, instead of giving the star weight to the Buster cards, Now this gives that same star weight but to the arts cards for 1 turn, and buffs his NP gain by 50% for that turn. So essentially what you're supposed to do with this skill is you pop this, suck up all the stars on those arts cards, massively gas up their NP gain, and then just let this dude pop off with those arts cards and refund a massive amount of his NP. And if you do get really lucky, if you have a turn where you have like the 2 arts cards and none of the buster cards, you can actually pop this skill and the first skill to also give those arts cards a little bit of a bite by giving them the 50% crit damage. This skill also does come with a dodge as well for 1 turn, just so he has some little bit of survivability. It's no invincibility, and dodge kind of is the worst method of survivability in the game because it gets pierced by pretty much everything, right? You can remove the buff, you can hit it with sure hit, you can get it with pierce invincibility for whatever reason, but it's still some survivability, right? Definitely not gonna knock him for having a dodge. But then finally we have his third skill, and I think this is where they kind of make up a little bit for him having the shaft on the crit damage, because they gave him a 40% buster buff that lasts for 3 turns, so almost a mana burst, but it's unrestricted on 3 turns, which again is pretty dang good. Then he also gets built-in pierce evasion for 3 turns, and then kind of as a mid-last effect where it's just reducing all enemies' critical attack chance by 20% for 3 turns, so yippee, like, you might not get crit that one time. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, right? It's one of those effects that you have on servants that's just like, oh, great, like, reducing critical attack chance. It's good because if you get crit, you can get 1 shot, but you're like, I kind of would just rather have something a bit more flashy, like, maybe another just specific 50% buster crit damage, I don't know, just double stack it right there. But still, having the built-in pierce evasion for 3 turns, and then having an almost buster mana burst for 3 turns is insanely good. And it just means that this guy is capable of putting out some pretty decent damage, especially when you look at his NP, where he has 2 pretty good damage mods. Now, the first damage mod that he has on his NP is a 200% extra damage against Onis. Now, this is really, really high, and that's because there's not a whole lot of Oni enemies in the game. You guys kind of know what these enemies are. These are the Shuten dojis, the Ibaraki dojis, Tomoe. These servants are not super common to fight, but when they do pop up around, it doesn't matter that they're type neutral or even type disadvantage. You can just bring Suna to that fight and he will rip them apart. Because of his second damage mod being a damage mod against demonic enemies that scales by 20 to 40%, which is unfortunately really low for an overcharge effect, but it's also because there's quite a decent bit of demonic enemies and they're pretty common in the game. You'll probably fight at least some demonic enemies per event and per story chapter. Although I didn't think they needed to make it this low, they probably could have just gone 50 to 100%. Just why not? Let's gas up his damage. But the Oni enemies also are demonic, so he gets a double buff against them. Like, what I'm saying is if you bring him to fight any Oni person, he is going to rip them apart in a most ceremonious manner. It is going to be just absolute insane amounts of destruction that he's pulling on them. But even if he's not fighting an Oni, even though he's losing a massive amount of damage with that, he still does pretty decent damage against demonic enemies. And that's kind of the gist for Suna over here. He's kind of just a big beat stick with a little bit of intricacies in there, but again, he's like a year 5 beat stick. You know, he's like a modern beat stick over here. So is he worth summoning for? I would probably say no, but he's on a banner with Ibuki Doji, so he's a pretty good consolation prize if you don't get her. And is kind of also just a good target as well as going for Ibuki, because then you get a really strong AoE Buster Saber, and then you get a pretty strong single target Buster Saber as well. Although, that being said, on his original banner, if I'm remembering correctly, he comes out with Ashia Doman, which is a little odd. So this might be like a pretty decent banner to like strengthen up your Saber part of your Chaldea box. But then again, we do have a new Guda Guda event coming out in just a few days. And I'm kind of speculating that we might see a single target Arts Avenger sometime in the near future. After doing that top 5 Arts video and then not noticing that there was any single target Arts Avenger servants that are really top tier like Jalter and Kagekiyo, I'm kind of speculating we might get something like that. So maybe hold off your quartz unless you really just like the K-pop meme. But with that being said, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. With all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace, late guys.